Commander James Chen stood at the observation window of the Nexus station and looked out at the most beautiful and terrifying sight he had ever seen. The Zifferon homeworld hung in the darkness of space, like a massive crystal catching light from distant stars. Its surface was made of towering structures that seemed to grow from the ground itself, all glowing with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with something unseen. The planet was home to a civilization that had existed for over 50,000 years, and now, for the first time in 300 years, they were allowing a human to step onto their soil. James had been chosen for this mission because the leaders of Earth believed he was the best chance they had of bridging the gap between humanity and the Zifferon Empire. He was tall and composed, with a calm presence that made others feel safe around him. He had studied the Zifferon language for 2 years, learning their complex system of communication that involved both words and strange harmonic tones. He knew their history, their philosophy, and their culture better than almost any human alive. But knowing about them and actually meeting them were two very different things. The briefing had been clear and sobering. Humanity had recently joined the larger galactic community after decades of isolation on their home planet Earth, was small and young compared to other civilizations, and many of the older species saw humans as crude and simple. The Zifferon were perhaps the most advanced species in the known galaxy, and they had a reputation for being cold, logical, and absolutely dismissive of anything they considered inferior. The previous meetings between Earth and Zifferon had been conducted only by lower-ranking officials who treated humans with barely concealed contempt, but then something unexpected happened. The Zifferon Queen herself, Empress Vela, had requested this meeting. She had not appeared in person before any non-Zifferon species in 3 centuries, and the fact that she was breaking this tradition to meet with a human commander was shocking to everyone. The Council of Resonance, the group of elderly Zifferon who advised the Queen on all matters, was deeply unhappy about this decision. They whispered that the Queen was losing her way, that she was becoming sentimental, or that she was threatening the purity of Zifferon civilization. James prepared himself mentally as he walked through the corridors of the Nexus station toward the transport that would take him to the surface. The station was a neutral ground, built long ago by the Zifferon as a place where different species could meet and trade. The walls were made of the same crystal material as the Zifferon homeworld, and everything about it felt alien and wrong to human senses. He passed by other species along the way, beings of all different shapes and sizes, and they all seemed to be watching him with curiosity or judgment, or both. The transport descended through the atmosphere, and James watched the landscape below grow larger and more detailed. The crystal towers were even more spectacular up close, towering thousands of feet into the sky and connected by bridges of solid light that seemed to defy physics. The city was perfectly organized, with every building in its exact place, every street aligned to some mathematical pattern that the Zifferon found pleasing. The grand crystalline throne room was at the center of the largest tower. The moment James stepped inside, he felt the weight of history and power in every corner. The room was immense, stretching upward until it disappeared into darkness. The walls were made of a material that seemed to be alive with light, shifting colors and patterns that almost looked like communication. The floor beneath his feet was smooth and cold, and it reflected the light from above in a way that made it seem like he was walking on nothing at all. The Council of Resonance sat on high platforms that circled the room, arranged in a pattern that suggested both hierarchy and harmony. There were 12 of them, all ancient by Zifferon standards, with skin that had taken on a translucent quality that allowed you to see the patterns of light moving beneath the surface. Each one of them looked at James with an expression that ranged from mild interest to open contempt. They viewed humans as simple creatures, little more than animals that had managed to figure out how to use tools. James stepped forward and began his prepared speech. He had chosen his words carefully, by constructing sentences in the Zifferon language that would appeal to their logic while also suggesting the value of trade and alliance between their peoples. He spoke of Earth's resources, of humanity's willingness to learn from the Zifferon, of the mutual benefit that could come from peaceful cooperation. He spoke in a steady voice, not showing any of the fear that ran through his body. The council listened in silence, and when James finished, there was a long pause. The oldest member of the council, a being named Resonant Thix, responded in a voice that sounded like wind moving through crystal. He said that humanity was interesting but ultimately too unpredictable, too driven by emotion rather than logic, to be a reliable ally. He said that the Zifferon had no need for human resources, and that friendship with a young species like humanity would only slow down Zifferon progress. Thix's words were measured and cold, and they seemed to settle over the room like a heavy weight. James felt his opportunity slipping away. His carefully prepared arguments seemed small and insignificant in the face of such dismissal. Then something changed. The light in the room shifted, and a doorway opened at the far end of the throne room. A figure emerged from the shadows, and the moment she appeared, James understood why the Zifferon had always dominated every species they encountered. Empress Vela was beautiful in a way that was almost painful to look at. Her form was tall and graceful, and with the characteristic Zifferon features of crystalline skin and delicate antennae that rose from her head like living sculptures. Her eyes were large and luminous, and they seemed to contain more intelligence and depth than any eyes James had ever seen before. She wore robes made of materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid, and they trailed behind her as she moved. She did not speak at first. She simply looked at James from across the vast expanse of the throne room, and as their eyes met, something extraordinary happened. James felt a sudden shift in the air around him, as if the room itself was responding to her presence. Her antennae quivered, a small movement that seemed to send a subtle wave of energy through the space between them. The council members stiffened noticeably, and James could sense that something unprecedented was happening, something that frightened them. The Queen's eyes remained locked on James, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. In that moment, James understood that his carefully planned speech and his logical arguments meant nothing. What mattered was that the most powerful being in this solar system was looking at him as if she saw something in him that no one else had ever seen before. The moment Queen Vela entered the throne room, the entire atmosphere changed, becoming charged with an energy that James had never felt before. She moved with a kind of grace that seemed almost unnatural, as if she was dancing through the space rather than simply walking across it. Her antennae moved in complex patterns that seemed to send subtle signals to everyone around her, though James could not understand what she was communicating. The council members immediately straightened in their chairs, and James noticed that Resonant Thix leaned back as if physically pushed by her presence. The Queen ascended a platform at the far end of the room, and she seated herself on a throne made of what appeared to be living crystal, a material that pulsed with light in rhythm with her breathing. She did not acknowledge the council members directly. Instead, her eyes remained fixed on James, studying him with an intensity that made his heart race. When Queen Vela finally spoke, her voice was different from what James had expected. It was not the harsh, crystalline sound of other Zifferon. He heard something in it that sounded almost like music, but with undertones of warmth that contradicted everything he had been taught about Zifferon nature. Her words were spoken in their native language, but they were carefully chosen so that someone with James's level of language training could understand them. She asked James about the humans who had sent him, about what they hoped to gain from this contact with the Zifferon Empire. James responded carefully, and as he spoke, the Queen asked him more questions, not about trade or resources, but about human nature itself. She asked him what drove humans to explore, what made them willing to risk their lives for uncertain rewards, what made them believe that they could negotiate with a civilization so obviously superior to their own. James found himself speaking more honestly than he had planned to do. He talked about human curiosity, about the human desire to find meaning and connection, about the dreams that kept humans moving forward even when success seemed impossible. As James spoke, he noticed the council members becoming increasingly agitated. Resonant Thix kept trying to interrupt, but the Queen silenced him with a single gesture that was both graceful and commanding. She leaned forward on her throne, and her antennae moved in patterns that seemed to express excitement. She asked James about human history, about the wars that humans had fought, about the art that humans created, about the way humans loved and dreamed and feared. James answered her questions as best he could, sometimes struggling to find Zifferon words for human concepts that had no equivalents in their language. The Queen seemed to understand his struggle, and she made adjustments to her questions. I'm asking simpler things or explaining what she meant in different ways. It was as if she genuinely wanted to understand humanity, not to judge it or dismiss it. The formal meeting continued for several hours. The Queen asked about Earth's geography, its climate, its people, its history. She asked about human music and art and literature. She asked about human wars and human peace. She asked about human love and human grief. James found himself becoming more and more comfortable, speaking to her as he might speak to someone who truly wanted to understand his world, rather than someone who was merely evaluating it for weakness. When the formal meeting finally ended, the council members left in a state of clear agitation. Thix gave James a look that was filled with something that might have been fear. Vela remained on her throne and watched as the other council members filed out of the room slowly and reluctantly, clearly unhappy that the Queen had shown such interest in humanity. After the chamber had emptied except for a few guards stationed at the far ends of the room, the Queen rose from her throne and began walking toward James. He stood still, uncertain whether he should move or approach her. She moved with the same graceful steps she had used before, and as she came closer, James realized that she was actually quite tall. Nearly as tall as he was. Her crystalline skin seemed to glow with an inner light that was comforting rather than threatening. She did something that shocked James completely. She reached out her hand and touched his face with delicate fingers that were surprisingly warm. Her skin was smooth and cool, and it felt like touching the surface of water that had been chilled beneath moonlight. She looked into his eyes and spoke words in a voice that was barely above a whisper. She said that she had been watching humanity for many years, far longer than anyone on Earth knew or suspected. She said that human intelligence agencies had never detected the Zifferon probes that had been observing Earth for decades. She spoke of everything she had learned about humans, from their wars to their art, from their cruelty to their amazing capacity for kindness. She said that she had watched humans love, that she had observed human grief, that she had seen human beings sacrifice everything for others. Then she said something that changed everything between them. She told him that the Zifferon had once been like humans, that long ago, before they had become so focused on logic and perfection, they had felt emotion as humans did, but they had decided that emotion was a weakness, and so they had slowly removed it from their society, training it out of themselves across thousands of years until almost no Zifferon could feel anything deeply anymore. She said that this loss had made the Zifferon brilliant, but empty, powerful but without purpose, advanced but without meaning. She said that she saw in James and in humanity something that the Zifferon had lost and desperately needed. She said that she saw people who had not yet learned to kill their own hearts, who still knew how to feel, who still believed that emotion and logic could work together rather than against each other. She reached out and took his hand, and her antennae moved in soft patterns that somehow conveyed feelings of joy and sorrow all at once. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she spoke words that James would never forget. She told him to come to her, that his kind humanity still knew how to feel. She told him that the Zephyron had once been beautiful like humans were beautiful, and that if humanity was careful, they might never lose that gift as the Zephyron had lost it. James opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the guards appeared from hidden doorways. The Queen released his hand and stepped back with a kind of reluctance that was visible in every movement of her body. She looked at him once more with those luminous eyes, and then she turned and walked back toward her inner chambers. She did not look back, but as she disappeared through the crystalline doorway, James felt certain that she had wanted him to follow, that she had been inviting him to come deeper into her world. Over the next several days, James received multiple invitations to private audiences with Queen Vela. These meetings were not officially announced, and James realized that she was taking great care to keep them secret from the Council of Resonance. He would receive a message through his communication device, and when he would make his way to different locations throughout the Crystal Towers, always avoiding the main corridors where he might be seen by other Zephyron. Each meeting with the Queen lasted for hours. They would talk in rooms filled with beautiful objects that James recognized as art, something that the more rigid Zephyron society claimed was unnecessary and illogical. Vela would show him paintings and sculptures and pieces of music, all things that she said had been created by Zephyron who lived thousands of years ago, before the Council of Resonance had decided that emotion was something to be eliminated from their civilization. Vela spoke to James about her loneliness. Her position as queen gave her power, but it also gave her isolation. She said that she had ruled for nearly 200 years, watching her people become more logical and cold with every generation. She told him that she had tried many times to convince the council that the Zephyron were slowly dying from the inside, that without emotion and art and love, they were becoming nothing more than machines that happened to be alive. James listened to her words and found himself becoming drawn to her in a way that he had not anticipated. His attraction was not purely physical, though he would have been lying if he said he did not find her beautiful. Rather, he found himself attracted to her mind, to her courage, to her willingness to question the fundamental principles of her entire civilization. She seemed to understand human nature in a way that no alien being had ever understood him before, and in return, he found himself understanding her in ways that grew deeper with each conversation. During one of these private meetings, Vela revealed something that shocked James. She explained that the Zephyron Empire was slowly dying not from outside threats, but from inside decay. Their population was stable, but their culture was stagnant. Young Zephyron were not developing any new ideas or new art. They were not asking questions or challenging the old ways. They were becoming copies of copies, generations of beings that were almost identical to their parents in every way that mattered. Young Zephyron were even starting to question whether they should continue existing at all, whether a perfect logical society served any purpose. Vela looked at James with desperate intensity and asked him what he thought should be done. James took her hand. On something that would have been completely inappropriate with any other Zephyron, but with Vela, it felt natural and right. He told her that maybe the answer was not to follow the path of pure logic, but to find a balance between the mind and the heart. He suggested something radical, something that he knew would shock not only the council, but possibly the entire Zephyron civilization. James proposed that the Zephyron needed to open their doors, not just to trade with other species, but to genuinely learn from them, to begin a cultural exchange program where young Zephyron could visit other worlds and learn art and music and the meaning of emotion from species that had never abandoned these things. He said that humans had much to teach the Zephyron about feeling. Just as the Zephyron had much to teach humans about logic and reason, Vela rose from her seat and walked to a window that looked out over the crystal city below. She stood there for a long moment, her antennae moving in slow, thoughtful patterns. Then she turned back to face James and told him that his idea was beautiful, but dangerous. She said that if she tried to implement such a program without the Council's approval, they would see it as a direct threat to Zifferon purity. They might even move to have her removed from power, something that had not happened in over 3,000 years, but was technically possible under Zifferon law. James stepped toward her and said that sometimes the most important things in life required taking risks. He told her that she was the queen, that she had power that no one else in her civilization possessed, and that she could not wait for the council to approve something that they would never approve. He asked her whether she wanted to spend the rest of her long life watching her people slowly fade away into pure logic and mathematical perfection, or whether she wanted to take a chance on something new, something that might save her civilization. Vela looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled, something that James realized he had never seen her do before. Her smile transformed her entire face, revealing a beauty that went far beyond physical appearance. In that moment, James saw the being that she had been before she had learned to suppress her emotions, and he understood why the council feared her so much. She told James that she would do it. She would propose the cultural exchange program to the council. She would invoke an ancient law called the Resonance of the Sovereign, which gave the queen absolute authority to make a single binding decision without needing council approval. She would use that authority to officially propose a new relationship between the Zifferon and humanity, one based not just on trade, but on genuine connection and mutual learning. For the next week, preparations were made in secret. Vela began gathering support among the younger members of the council, beings who were only a few hundred years old and who had never completely accepted the doctrines of the older members. She also reached out to influential figures in Zifferon society, and artists and philosophers and musicians who had been keeping their work hidden, but who suddenly found themselves brought into the light. James worked with her, helping to develop presentations that would explain the proposal in a way that might appeal to the logical side of Zifferon nature, while also showing the beauty of what they might gain. The day came when Vela called for a full assembly of the council and the highest-ranking members of Zifferon society. They gathered in the grand crystalline throne room, and Vela stood before them. She presented her vision, speaking with a passion and emotion that shocked everyone in the room. She described what the Zifferon had lost, what they had become, and what they might become if they were brave enough to change. She spoke of humanity not as a primitive species to be studied from a distance, but as a potential partner in a new kind of future. When she finished, resonant, Thix stood and his voice filled the room with a cold fury. He said that the queen was betraying everything that the Zifferon stood for, that she was threatening their purity with the contamination of human emotion. He moved to invoke the ancient law that allowed the council to remove a queen who had lost her way. But before he could complete the invocation, Vela raised her hand and spoke a word in the old Zifferon language, a word that had not been used in 5,000 years. She invoked the resonance of the sovereign, and the room erupted in shocked silence. She had used her ancient right, and now her decision was binding. Her proposal to open Zifferon society to cultural exchange with humanity would move forward. The council could not stop her. The moment the queen invoked the resonance of the sovereign, chaos erupted in the throne room. Resonant. Thix stood trembling with rage, and several other council members rose from their seats in clear protest. Some of them walked out of the chamber entirely, their footsteps echoing off the crystal walls in a way that sounded like thunder. The remaining council members sat in stunned silence, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. James realized that this was his moment. The queen had used her absolute authority to push forward with her vision. But now the Zifferon civilization was on the brink of dividing. He understood that words would matter, now more than ever. He stood up from his position in the observation gallery and moved forward toward the center of the chamber. Everyone turned to stare at him, as if they had forgotten that he was even there. James stepped into the middle of the floor and began to speak. His voice was calm and steady, and although he had prepared these words, they came from a place deep inside him that was filled with genuine conviction. He spoke in perfect Zifferon, using the complex harmonic tones that he had practiced for so long that they had become almost natural to him. The assembled Zifferon seemed shocked that a human could speak their language so fluently, so naturally. And as if he understood not just the words, but the deeper meaning behind them, James spoke about fear, which he said was the true enemy of the Zifferon, not humanity or emotion or change. He told them that he had studied their history, and he had learned that every great achievement in Zifferon civilization had come from beings who were brave enough to challenge the way things had always been done. He said that the first Zifferon who had suggested that logic should be valued had been branded as a radical, but their ideas had eventually led to the greatest period of advancement in their history. He spoke about human history, and he did not shy away from the difficult parts. He told them about human wars, about human cruelty, and about human suffering. He told them that humans had faced extinction multiple times throughout their short existence as a species, but instead of giving up, humans had always chosen to continue forward. He spoke about how humans had crossed vast oceans without knowing what they would find on the other side. How humans had looked up at the stars and decided that somehow, against all odds, they would find a way to reach them. James looked directly at Thix and spoke words that he knew might make the council member his permanent enemy. He said that the fear that Thix felt was not the fear of contamination or loss of purity. It was the fear of change, the fear that the old ways might not be the only ways. Oh, the fear that a queen who could feel might be more wise than a council that could only think. He told the assembled Zifferon that their queen saw something that their logic prevented them from seeing. He said that she saw that emotion was not the opposite of intelligence, but rather a different form of it. He said that humans had proven that logic and emotion could exist together, that a being could be brilliant while also being able to love, that a civilization could be powerful while also being beautiful. James spoke about Queen Vela with a respect and admiration that was clearly visible to everyone in the room. He said that it took more courage to challenge one's entire civilization than to follow tradition blindly. He said that the Queen's decision to open Zifferon society to cultural exchange was not a betrayal, but a rescue. He said that she was trying to save her people from a slow death that was disguised as perfection. As James spoke, he watched the younger members of the council begin to nod in understanding. He saw some of them lean toward each other and whisper conversations that seemed to suggest agreement with his words. The older members seemed less convinced, but even they did not interrupt him. He could feel the momentum shifting, and feel the room responding to his words and his passion and his genuine belief in what the Queen was trying to accomplish. When James finished speaking, there was a long silence. The weight of what had been said seemed to settle over the chamber like snow falling slowly from a clear sky. Then, one of the younger council members stood and made a gesture that indicated respect and agreement. With that first show of support, others began to stand as well. Some of the older members remained seated, but James could see that they were watching, waiting to see which way the tide would turn. Resonant Thix rose slowly and left the chamber. His departure was accompanied by 3 other Old Guard council members, but as they left, more of the younger members came forward to pledge their support to the Queen and to James's vision. The transformation happened not all at once, but gradually, like a crystal forming from a solution of liquid minerals. After the assembly ended, James was taken to a private chamber where he could rest. After the intensity of the last few hours, exhaustion seemed to overtake him. But before he could fully sleep, there came a quiet sound at his door. When he opened it, he found Queen Vela standing in the corridor alone, something that seemed impossible for someone of her importance. She asked him to walk with her, and they made their way through the silent crystal towers to a place that looked out over the entire city. The view was breathtaking, with towers of crystal rising toward the sky and streams of light flowing between them in organized patterns. She stood beside him and spoke about her fears, about the possibility that she had just destroyed her civilization rather than saving it. James told her that what she had done took more courage than anything he could imagine. He told her that she had risked everything she had for the chance to make her world better. He said that humans had a saying that life was not about the destination but about the journey, and he told her that the journey she was starting with the Zifferon people, the journey toward rediscovering feeling and emotion and art and beauty, that was a journey worth taking even if it was difficult, even if it was dangerous, even if it cost her everything. Vela looked at him with those luminous eyes that seemed to contain all the wisdom of her ancient civilization and all the hope of a new beginning. She reached out and took his hand, and in that moment James understood that whatever happened next, whatever challenges lay ahead for both their civilizations, this moment was worth any cost. 3 weeks after the Queen invoked the resonance of the Sovereign, a message arrived at the Nexus station from Earth. The message was urgent and coded in a way that only James could decode. When he opened it and read the words from the United Nations Security Council and the leaders of various Earth nations, and his heart sank. The governments of Earth had learned of his private meetings with Queen Vela and the nature of their growing connection. The message was clear and commanding. James was to return to Earth immediately. They were concerned that he had been manipulated by the Zifferon Queen, that the entire diplomatic situation had been compromised. They feared that this was all an elaborate trap, designed to make humans vulnerable to Zifferon influence. They wanted him home, where they could debrief him and investigate what had really happened during his time away. James sat alone in his quarters and contemplated his options. He could return to Earth as ordered and try to explain everything to the governments that had sent him. But he understood that they would not believe him. They would see his defense of Vela as proof that he had been compromised. They would see his trust in the Zifferon Queen as evidence of manipulation. He would spend the rest of his life as a subject of suspicion and investigation, or he could stay with Vela and commit himself fully to this new alliance. But staying would mean abandoning his home planet, the people, his entire civilization. It would mean being branded a traitor to humanity, a deserter who had chosen to side with aliens over his own species. It would be a choice that would echo through history and define not just him, but potentially Earth's relationship with the Zifferon Empire for generations to come. James realized that there was a third option, one that was far more dangerous but also far more true. He would broadcast the truth of everything that had happened, not as a defense, but as a genuine statement about what connection and understanding between species could truly mean. He would speak directly to both Earth and the Zifferon Empire, and he would speak not as a diplomat, but as a human being. He spent the next several hours preparing his message. He wrote it carefully, crafting words that would explain the truth as he understood it. He did not present himself as a hero or as a victim. He simply told the story of what had happened, the encounters with the Queen, the conversations about civilization and emotion and the future. He described Vela not as an enemy, but as a being who had risked everything to save her people from a slow death of logical perfection. When he was ready, James broadcast his message on all frequencies, both human and Zifferon, and on all the open channels that connected the civilizations of the galaxy. His voice carried across the vacuum of space, transmitted through quantum communicators to billions of beings across dozens of worlds. He spoke about fear and how it prevented beings from seeing possibilities. He spoke about Queen Vela with a kind of tenderness that made it clear that his feelings were real and not the result of alien manipulation. He told the governments of Earth that they had a choice to make. They could respond with fear and suspicion and close their borders to this new alliance, or they could be brave enough to believe that connection between species was possible, that understanding could bridge even the largest divides. He spoke to the Zifferon people directly, and he told them that humanity understood what they were going through. The process of change was frightening. It was easy to cling to old ways because they were familiar. But he told them that humans had learned across thousands of years of history that growth required letting go of safety and accepting the possibility of becoming something new. James explained that the Queen was not asking them to abandon logic or reason. She was asking them to remember that they had once been capable of feeling, that they had once created art and music and beauty, that their ancestors had loved with a depth that had shaped their entire civilization. He told the Zifferon that reclaiming that part of themselves would not make them weaker, it would make them whole. The broadcast lasted for nearly 4 hours. When it ended, James knew that he could not return to Earth even if he wanted to. He had burned that bridge. He had chosen his side in a conflict that he hoped would never actually become violent. But he had also done something that he believed was necessary. He had spoken the truth about what he had experienced and what he believed about the possibility of understanding between different forms of life. The response from Earth was divided. Some governments called for his execution. Others recognized the truth in his words and began to see the possibility of what Vela and James were trying to build within 2 weeks. And the United Nations issued a formal apology. They acknowledged that James had been acting as a true representative of humanity, not by following orders blindly, but by choosing compassion and understanding over fear. The Zifferon response was even more dramatic. The broadcast sparked a revolution of sorts. Young Zifferon, who had hidden their emotional natures, began to emerge from the shadows. Artists and musicians and philosophers came forward with work that they had been keeping secret. Their creative works began to spread through Zifferon society, and it became clear that emotion and artistic impulse had never truly died among the Zifferon people. It had only been hidden, but not all Zifferon supported the changes. Resonant Thix and his followers refused to accept the new direction. The Zifferon civilization fractured into competing factions, some following the Queen toward a new vision, and others clinging to the old ways of pure logic. For a time, it seemed possible that civil war might break out. Then something unexpected happened. The younger generation of Zifferon, inspired by the words of both James and the Queen, simply began to change. They started learning art and music. They began asking questions and challenging authority. They proved that being Zifferon and being emotional were not mutually exclusive. This silent revolution proved far more powerful than any decree from above or any conflict between factions. Months passed. The two civilizations began to build something new together. They created the Alliance of Resonance and Heart, a governmental structure that tried to combine the strengths of both species. The logical brilliance of the Zifferon merged with the creative passion of humanity. Ships began to travel regularly between Earth and the Zifferon homeworld, carrying students and artists and scientists who wanted to learn from each other on the Nexus station at the point between two worlds. Queen Vela and James Chen stood together at an observation window. They looked out at the curve of the Zifferon homeworld on one side and Earth on the other. Two distant blue planets hanging in darkness. James had finally answered the whisper that the Queen had spoken to him so long ago. Come to me, human. Yes, he had come. And yes, he was staying. He would spend his life building bridges between their peoples, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.